How about now? Can you hear me now? Let's see if we can work out this first. Maybe I'll figure out how to cut all this out in post. Unfortunately, they are on a delay, so I'm not going to know for sure until I hear from them. There we go. Now you'll know exactly how long the delay was. Alright. Well, that's a little peculiar, but I will figure that out later. And hopefully things sound good. In terms of the balance, is there anything that needs to be quieter or louder? You can let me know that now. Now, seeing as all of that was said in silence, I imagine, let's repeat what today is. Today is going to be a smaller crowd, of course, because we are not doing crazy games or anything. We are just going to sit here and hear some old fairy tales. Specifically, I'm going to look at two today. We are going to look at The Fisherman and His Wife, which is from Grimm's Fairytales, which is probably a source you've heard of. It's certainly the sort of Northern European source of famous fairy tales, but this is one of the lesser known. Okay, turn down the fireplace, absolutely. There we go. Okay. Hopefully that muffles it out a bit. So, the second thing we are going to read is actually an Oliver Wilde story, who you may have heard of because he is a more traditional literary writer, based out of London, I believe. I'm not a literary scholar by any stretch, as will become evident. The story we're reading from him is The Happy Prince, which is from a collection of fairy tale-like stories he did. Before we get to the stories, though, there's a couple of things I want to mention. First of all, we got some new subscribers off our video last week, where we were doing our group storytelling. And if you haven't seen that, the recording of it is still up on this very YouTube channel. And you should definitely go and, did I not say Oscar Wilde? Should definitely go and check out that video if you haven't seen it. Sorry, chat was asking me something. From that video, we got some subscribers. So the subscribers I want to mention here is Strawberry Queen. Our very own Spencer joined our channel. Thank God. Our own people are coming. Kutaru, Suki, and Caroline. There's actually more than that joined, but for whatever reason, YouTube doesn't let me know who they are. So if that's you, I am sorry. And thank you very much for subscribing. One of the more important things that we can help us right now is subscribing to our YouTube channel. Now, I very well could have said Oliver, Caroline. There's a few things going on here. If I did, I apologize. Oscar Wilde is who we're reading, not Oliver Wilde. I don't know who Oliver Wilde is, but I'm sure he's a very pleasant man from a far distant time. But thank you for subscribing. If you haven't already and you're not too sure how to do it, it's a big button under the video that says subscribe. And I'd really appreciate it. You'll get notifications too that we are going live, so you won't miss anything. Now, with that out of the way, I did have a couple of questions that I wanted to address, or sort of hangovers from the last video. First of all, in the last video I called one of our members Aksanti. Her real name is Ashanti, so I apologize for mispronouncing that. And I also want to apologize to my niece for not writing her about flying pugs, because she was distressed. And I will write that as soon as I am able. Also, since it was my birthday, a couple of people asked me some questions about what I got. I won't really share everything I got, but I thought I may as well. Just because some of it is cool. One of the things I got was this figurine, which comes from a game that is being very maligned right now, but that I played and enjoyed, called Cyberpunk. That's Keanu Reeves as a character in the game, if you didn't know. And then I also got, which links to something I mentioned last week, a very cool Geralt of Rivia figure. Gotta get used to the mirror. It's carrying some heads. Geralt of Rivia, of course, is the Witcher. That's the Geralt from the game, if you're thinking it doesn't look like the one from the series. And then just two quick more things that I got. I got a Princess Bride board game, which I am very much looking forward to trying. It has a really beautiful kit in it. And then I got this, the Recipes from the World of Tolkien, which is a collection of recipes with really beautiful art, kind of watercolory, and little sketches of Gollum and stuff. That's a sample of some of the things I got. Yeah, the Geralt is very cool, Kataru. Yeah. And I also just got today, actually, if you follow this sort of stuff, a friend of mine sent me Neil Gaiman, his first collection of stories. It's technically a graphic novel from his series The Sandman, which is what made him famous. He's more famous now probably for American Gods, which is a TV show based on a book that is out. Actually, I think he also wrote, blanking on the name, Starlight, I think it's called, or something, which also had a movie based on it, starring Robert De Niro as a cross-dressing pirate. If I'm remembering this correctly, I believe he wrote that as well. Anyways, I've never read his Sandman stuff, so my friend Nathan, who subscribes to this channel, sent it to me, along with a little thumb drive in the package that had just a beautiful birthday card, a digital one that I wanted to show you, because he clearly put a lot of work into it. There we go. On the thumb drive, there was one file, and that was it. It was this birthday card. And it made me laugh so much I wanted to share it with you. Anyways, thank you very much for everybody who gave me a lot of love on my birthday last week. I won't waste your time any longer. We will look at our story. Stardust. Thank you, Asuki. I knew it wasn't Starlight, but I could not remember the name. Can someone confirm if that's a Neil Gaiman book? I'm pretty sure it is. Okay. So, we are going to start out with a Grimm's fairy tale. And Grimm's fairy tales, of course, are the classic fairy tale format. And we're just going to enjoy it, the story, but I guess I feel that with all these stories, a little bit of context might be helpful with some of them. The fisherman and his wife follows a really common trope in fairy tales, that most of the problems in the world stem back to women and their foolishness, which is obviously not true, and is very, very much because of who got to write stories, that perspective was pushed. Obviously, in any partnership, people have complaints about their partners, and if only one side of that partnership is traditionally publishing stories, you're going to notice some trends. Because I think that stories are cultural threads, for better or worse. They are how we weave our imagery and our decisions back to earlier times. I think it's important to remember, as we go through this story, that this kind of stuff can settle in the back of your mind sometimes and inform more thoughts than it should. So when we encounter fairy tales being a little bit cheap about how they're representing people or groups of people, maybe spend a moment and try to remember somebody belonging to that gender group or race in your life that's helped you and certainly doesn't fit that mold. Because we don't need to continue everything that was informed from the past. In fact, I hope we don't. Nonetheless, it's a fun little tale, and so I'd like to read it for you now. The story is called The Fisherman and His Wife. We're going to read a version of it that comes from 1922 printing that you can see for yourself on Project Gutenberg. Let me just get a little bit of water. The Fisherman and His Wife. There was once on a time a fisherman who lived with his wife in a miserable hovel close by the sea. And every day he went out fishing, and once as he was sitting with his rod, looking at the clear water, his line suddenly went down, far down below, and when he drew it up again, he brought out a large flounder. Then the flounder said to him, "Hark, you fisherman, I pray you let me live. I am no flounder really, but an enchanted prince. What good will it do you to kill me? I should not be good to eat. Put me in the water again and let me go." "Come," said the fisherman, "there is no need for so many words about it. A fish that can talk I should certainly let go anyhow." With that he put him back into the clear water, and the flounder went to the bottom, leaving a long streak of blood behind him. Then the fisherman got up and went home to his wife in the hovel. "Husband," said the woman, "have you caught nothing today?" "No," said the man, "I did catch a flounder who said he was an enchanted prince, so I let him go again." "Did you not wish for anything first?" said the woman. "No," said the man, "what should I wish for?" "Ah," said the woman, "it is surely hard to live always in this dirty hovel. You might have wished for a small cottage for us. Go back and call him. Tell him we want to have a small cottage. He will certainly give us that." "Ah," said the man, "why should I go there again?" "Why," said the woman, "you did catch him, and you let him go again. He's sure to do it. Go at once." The man still did not quite like to go, but did not want to oppose his wife, and went to the sea. When he got there, the sea was all green and yellow, and no longer smooth. So he stood and said, "Flounder, flounder in the sea, come, I pray thee, here to me, for my wife Dame Ilsabel wills not as I'd have her will." Then the flounder came to him and said, "Well, what does she want then?" "Ah," said the man, "I did catch you, and my wife says I really ought to have wished for something. She does not like to live in a wretched hovel any longer. She would like to have a cottage." "Go then," said the flounder, "she has it all ready." And when the man got home, his wife was no longer in the hovel, but instead of it, there stood a small cottage, and she was just sitting on a bench before the door. Then she took him by the hand and said to him, "Just come inside and look. Now isn't this a great deal better?" So they went in, and there was a small porch, and a pretty little parlor, and bedroom, and a kitchen and pantry, with the best of furniture, and fitted with the most beautiful things made of tin and brass, whatsoever was wanted. And behind the cottage there was a small yard with hens and ducks, and a little garden with flowers and fruit. "Look," said the wife, "is not that nice?" "Yes," said the husband, "and so we must always think it. Now we will live quite contented." "We will think about that," said the wife, and with that they ate something and went to bed. Everything went well for a week or a fortnight, and then the woman said, "Hark you, husband, this cottage is far too small for us, and the garden and the yard are little. The flounder might just as well have given us a larger house. I should like to live in a great stone castle. Go to the flounder and tell him to give us a castle." "Ah, wife," said the man, "the cottage is quite good enough. Why would we live in a castle?" "What?" said the woman. "Go at once. The flounder can always do that." "No, wife," said the man. "The flounder has just given us the cottage. I do not like to go back so soon. It might make him angry." "Go," said the woman. "He can do it quite easily, and will be glad to do it. Just you go to him." The man's heart grew heavy, and he did not wish to go. He said to himself, "It is not right," and yet he went. And when he came to the sea, the water was quite purple and dark blue and grey and thick, and no longer green and yellow, but it was still and quiet. And he stood there and said, "Flounder, flounder in the sea, come, I pray thee, here to me. For my wife, Dame Ilsebil, wills not as I'd have her will." "Well, what does she want now?" said the flounder. "Alas," said the man, half scared, "she wants to live in a great stone castle." "Go to it then. She is standing before the door," said the flounder. Then the man went home, and when he got there he found a great stone palace, and his wife was just standing on the steps going in. She took him by the hand and said, "Come in." So he went with her, and in the castle was a great hall paved with marble, and many servants who flung wide the doors. The walls were all bright with beautiful hangings, and in the rooms were chairs and tables of pure gold. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings, and all the rooms and bedrooms had carpets. Food and wine of the very best were standing on all the tables, so that they nearly broke down beneath it. Behind the house, too, there was a great courtyard, with stables for horses and cows and the very best of carriages. There was a magnificent large garden, too, with the most beautiful flowers and fruit trees, and a park quite half a mile long, in which there were stags, deer, and hares, and everything that could be desired. "Come," said the woman, "isn't that beautiful?" "Yes, indeed," said the man. "Now let it be, and we will live in this beautiful castle and be content." "We will consider about that," said the woman, "and sleep upon it." Thereupon they went to bed. Pardon me, a water break. Next morning the wife awoke first. It was just daybreak, and from her bed she saw the beautiful country lying before her. Her husband was still stretching himself, so she poked him in the side with her elbow and said, "Get up, husband, and just peep out the window. Look you, couldn't we be the king over all that land? Go to the flounder. We will be the king." "Ah, wife," said the man, "why should we be king? I do not want to be king." "Well," said the wife, "if you won't be king, I will. Go to the flounder, for I will be king." "Ah, wife," said the man, "why do you want to be king? I do not like to say that to him." "Why not?" said the woman. "Go to him at once. I must be king." So the man went, and was quite unhappy because his wife wished to be king. It is not right. It is not right, he thought. He did not wish to go, yet he went. And when he came to the sea, it was quite dark gray, and the water heaved up from below, and the smelt putrid. Then he went and stood by it and said, Flounder, flounder in the sea, come I pray thee here to me, for my wife Dame Ilsebil wills not as I'd have her will. Well, what does she want now? Said the flounder. Alas, said the man, she wants to be king. Go to her, she is king already. So the man went, and when he came to the palace, the castle had become much larger, and had a great tower and magnificent ornaments. The sentinel was standing before the door, and there were numbers of soldiers and kettle drums and trumpets. And when he went inside the house, everything was of real marble and gold, with velvet covers and great golden tassels. Then the doors of the halls were opened, and there was the court in all its splendor. And his wife was sitting on a high throne of gold and diamonds, with a great crown of gold on her head, and a scepter of pure gold, and jewels in her hands. On both sides of her stood her maids in waiting in a row, each of them always one head shorter than the last. Then he went and stood before her and said, Ah, wife, and now you are king. Yes, said the woman, now I am king. So he stood and looked at her, and when he had looked at her thus for some time, he said, And now that you are king, let all else be. We will wish for nothing more. Nay, husband, said the woman, quite anxiously, I find time pass very heavily. I can bear it no longer. Go to the flounder. I am king, but I must be emperor too. Alas, wife, why do you wish to be emperor? Husband, said she, go to the flounder. I will be the emperor. Alas, wife, said the man, he cannot make you emperor. I may not say that to the fish. There is only one emperor in the land. An emperor the flounder cannot make you. I assure you he cannot. What? Said the woman. I am the king, and you are nothing but my husband. Will you go this moment? Go at once. If he can make a king, he can make an emperor. I will be emperor. Go instantly. So he was forced to go. As the man went, however, he was troubled in mind, and thought to himself, It will not end well. It will not end well. The emperor is too shameless. The flounder will at last be tired out. With that he reached the sea, and the sea was quite black and thick, and began to boil up from below, so that it threw up bubbles. And such a sharp wind blew over it that it curdled, and the man was afraid. Then he went and stood by it and said, Flounder, flounder in the sea, come I pray thee here to me, for my wife Dame Ilsebil wills not as I'd have her will. Well, what does she want now? Said the flounder. Alas, flounder, said he, my wife wants to be emperor. Go to her, said the flounder, she is emperor already. So the man went, and when he got there, the whole palace was made of polished marble, with alabaster figures and golden ornaments, and soldiers were marching before the door, blowing trumpets and beating cymbals and drums. In the house, barons and counts and dukes were going about as servants. Then they opened the doors to him, which were of pure gold. And when he entered, there he sat his wife on a throne, which was made of one piece of gold, and was quite 2 miles high. She wore a great golden crown that was 3 yards high, and set with diamonds and carbuncles. In one hand she had the scepter, and in the other the imperial orb. and on both sides of her stood the yeomen of the guard in 2 rows, each being smaller than the one before him, from the biggest giant, who was 2 miles high, to the very smallest dwarf, just as big as my little finger. And before it stood a number of princes and dukes. Then the man went and stood among them and said, "Wife, are you emperor now?" "Yes," said she. "Now I am emperor." Then he stood and looked at her well, and when he had looked at her thus for some time, he said, "Ah, wife, be content now that you are emperor." "Husband," said she, "why are you standing there? Now I am emperor, but I will be pope too. Go to the flounder." "Alas, wife," said the man, "what will you not wish for? You cannot be pope. There is but one in Christendom. He cannot make you pope." "Husband," said she, "I will be pope. Go immediately. I must be pope this very day." There's a little picture of her on her throne, which is one of the reasons why I like this book. It has beautiful art. Does chat like the art? I will carry on with the story. Let me know, chat. "No, wife," said the man. "I do not like to say that to him. That would not do. It is too much. The flounder can't make you pope." "Husband," said she, "what nonsense! If he can make an emperor, he can make a pope. Go to him directly. I am emperor, and you are nothing but my husband. Will you go at once?" Then he was afraid, and went. But he was quite faint, and shivered and shook, and his knees and legs trembled, and a high wind blew over the land, and the clouds flew, and toward evening all grew dark. And the leaves fell from the trees, and the water rose and roared as if it were boiling, and splashed upon the shore. In the distance he saw ships which were firing guns in their sore need, pitching and tossing on the waves. And yet, in the midst of the sky, there was a small bit of blue, though on every side it was red as in a heavy storm. So full of despair, he went and stood in much fear, and said, I think you know, "Flounder, flounder in the sea, come, I pray thee, here to me. For my wife, Dame Ilsebil, wills not as I'd have her will." I like to imagine you're all saying that with me. "Well, what does she want now?" said the flounder. "Alas," said the man, "she wants to be pope." "Go to her then," said the flounder. "She is pope already." So he went, and when he got there, he saw what seemed to be a large church surrounded by palaces. He pushed his way through the crowd. Inside, however, everything was lighted with thousands upon thousands of candles, and his wife was clad in gold, and she was sitting on a much higher throne, and had 3 great golden crowns on, and around about her there was much churchly splendor. And on both sides of her was a row of candles, the largest of which was as tall as the very tallest tower, down to the very smallest kitchen candle. And all the emperors and kings were on their knees before her, kissing her shoe. "Wife," said the man, and looked attentively at her, "are you now pope?" "Yes," said she, "I am pope." So he stood and looked at her. It was just as if he was looking at the bright sun. When he had stood looking at her thus for a short time, he said, "Ah, wife, if you are pope, do let well alone." But she looked stiff as a post, and did not move or show any signs of life. Then said he, "Wife, now that you are pope, be satisfied. You cannot become anything greater." "I'll consider about that," said the woman. Thereupon they went to bed, but she was not satisfied, and Greediness let her have no sleep, for she was continually thinking what there was left for her to be. The man slept well and soundly, for he had to run about a great deal during the day, but the woman could not fall asleep at all, and flung herself from one side to the other the whole night through, thinking about what more was left for her to be, but unable to call to mind anything else. At length the sun began to rise, and when the woman saw the red of dawn, she sat up in the bed and looked at it. And when through the window she saw the sun thus rising, she said, "Can I not, too, order the sun and moon to rise?" "Husband," said she, poking him in the ribs with her elbows, "wake up and go to the flounder, for I wish to be even as God is." The man was still half asleep, but he was so horrified that he fell out of bed. He thought he must have heard amiss, and rubbed his eyes, and said, "Alas, wife, what are you saying?" "Husband," said she, "if I can't order the sun and moon to rise, and have to look on and see the sun and moon rising, I can't bear it. I shall not know what it is to have another happy hour, unless I can make them rise myself." Then she looked at him so terribly that a shudder ran over him, and said, "Go at once, and I wish to be like unto God." "Alas, wife," said the man, falling on his knees before her, "the flounder cannot do that. He can make an emperor and a pope. I beseech you, go on as you are, and be pope." Then she fell into a rage, and her hair flew wildly about her head, and she cried, "I will not endure this. I will not bear it any longer. Will you go?" Then he put on his trousers and ran away like a madman. I mean, who wouldn't? But outside a great storm was raging, and blowing so hard that he could scarcely keep his feet. Houses and trees toppled over, mountains trembled, rocks rolled into the sea. The sky was pitch black, and it thundered and lightened. And the sea came in with black waves as high as church towers and mountains, and all with crests of white foam at the top. Then he cried, but could not hear his own words, but I'm sure you can guess what they are. "Flounder, flounder in the sea, come, I pray thee, here to me, for my wife Dame Ilsebil will not do as I'd have her will." "Well, what does she want now?" said the flounder. "Alas," said he, "she wants to be like unto God." "Go to her, and you will find her back again in the dirty hovel. And there they are living at this very time." And that's the end of the first story. Just going to have a drink of water. What did we think of that story, chat? And it's got some of the classic markers of a fairy tale. Things that make very little sense and are never followed up on. Like the fact that should a prince be turned into a fish, that's not the most important thing in the story. What really matters is naturally. If a prince is turned into a fish, they can grant wishes like being the Pope, who's married and female in the Middle Ages, I also like the very abrupt endings, which they are often marked with. But you let me know, chat, what you thought of that story. I gotta switch over the stories for a second, but I'm still listening. I see that Suki says she is a real career woman. Yes, it's definitely a challenge not to at times want to root for her and all of that, because she is something of a delight. Sorry, just a moment. In her own weird way. Also, Pope is 2 levels above King. Yeah, it's an interesting cultural perspective because in my very limited history with that I learned, there was often a representation of the Pope being, yes, a little bit above the King, but somehow being 2 parts of a similar caste. And this story paints a different picture. Also, the fisherman has no spine. No kidding. He just keeps going, well, I don't wanna, but then he just goes back. Sorry, that transition could have been a little bit better. And we will resize this very quickly. Here. So what do you think? For the ladies in the chat, do you think she should have just stopped at the Pope? Was that a reasonable goal? It's a very strange thing from this time to think as like the Pope being a great thing to be, because not that he isn't celebrated, but you know, compared to the bacchanal that is being a king or an emperor. Yeah. What an opportunist. Like he didn't enjoy the castle. No, I bet he didn't. How could he? He's such a simple man with no such tastes. You know, honestly, the way the story is written, the fact that they have, like they call it a king, it's not her becoming queen, she's king, and Pope, which at that time was an exclusively male role. I can't help but think like the original story was the husband, and that the writer was like, well, no, I don't want that guy to look dumb. And the wife was the one harassed, but I don't know. I have no basis for that. This is not a history class by any stretch. You'll have to ask Avalon for that. Suki says she should have asked to be emperor first. That would have made for a dull story. All right. So the next story is from Oscar Wilde, who of course is a far more famous figure. Well, not more famous, I guess. He isn't necessarily who you think of when you think of fairy tales. Oscar Wilde was like a poet and kind of a... Like the person who really modeled his life after him in modern times is Stephen Fry. Not to say they are equivalent, but that same kind of roustabout life of being bohemian and around. He had a very sad and tragic life, unfortunately, but he is a beautiful writer. And he wrote a little book of tales that are called The Happy Prince and Other Stories by Oscar Wilde. Again, this is a book you can find for free, and it works on ebook readers on Project Gutenberg. Now I'm going to talk about The Happy Prince. The Happy Prince is actually fairly balanced in its content in terms of sort of content awareness. It has one sentence in it that characterizes... It's not a particularly malicious one, but it does, for no particular reason, mention Jews in the ghetto exchanging cash, and that's the only mention of them anywhere. And I guess I would just remind you where I started with the stream, which is some of these old threads are really incomplete pictures of who people are, and I would encourage you to, you know, when you reach lines like that, help paint a new story by remembering the many, many varieties of people that you've known in your life who don't fit those kinds of molds. Nonetheless, the Story itself doesn't pin itself on that. It's just a passive description, but I wanted to mention it not to further what are still, frankly, even in television and film, fairly common stereotypes that are not helping anybody be who they need to be or want to be. So we're going to talk about the Happy Prince. Is there any questions in chat about our last story or this? If not, then I will carry on. And thank you again so much for listening. Like I said, I anticipate this being a smaller stream, and we actually have a pretty good viewership for just a guy reading stories. So thank you again. And please, if you're here and you haven't, please subscribe. Okay. The Happy Prince by Oscar Wilde. Look at that big fancy H. That's like the best thing about old fairy tale books. The first letter is art. High above the city, on a tall column, stood the statue of the Happy Prince. He was gilded all over with thin leaves of fine gold. For eyes he had 2 bright sapphires, and a large red ruby glowed on his sword hilt. He was very much admired indeed. He is as beautiful as a weathercock, remarked one of the town councillors, who wished to gain a reputation for having artistic tastes. Only not quite so useful, he added, fearing lest people think him unpractical, which he really was not. Why can't you be like the Happy Prince? Asked a sensible mother of her little boy, who was crying for the moon. The Happy Prince never dreams of crying for anything. I am glad there is someone in the world who is quite happy, muttered a disappointed man as he gazed at the wonderful statue. He looks just like an angel, said the charity children as they came out of the cathedral in their bright scarlet cloaks and their clean white pinafores. Forays? Somebody will have to let me know that. They're those very elaborate little dresses with big puffy shoulders. They almost look like aprons. You don't really see them much anymore. Oh, Vanessa said I have a relaxing storytelling voice. Thank you very much, Vanessa. That's very sweet of you to say. Anyways, children in white dresses came out and said the golden statue looked just like an angel. How do you know? Said the mathematical master. You have never seen one. Ah, but we have in our dreams, answered the children, and the mathematical master frowned and looked very severe, for he did not approve of children dreaming. One night there flew over the city a little swallow. His friends had gone away to Egypt 6 weeks before, but he had stayed behind, for he was in love with the most beautiful reed. He had met her early in the spring as he was flying down the river after a big yellow moth, and had been so attracted by her slender waist that he stopped to talk to her. Shall I love you? Said the swallow, who liked to come to the point at once, and the reed made a low bow. So he flew around and around her, touching the water with his wings and making silver ripples. This was his courtship, and it lasted all through the summer. It is a ridiculous attachment, twittered the other swallows. She has no money, and far too many relations. And indeed the river was quite full of reeds. Then when the autumn came, they all flew away. In case anyone is lost at this point, the swallow is literally in love with the plant, a reed. There is a bird called a reed, but that is not what it's referring to. After they had gone, he felt lonely and began to tire of this his lady love. She has no conversation, he said, and I am afraid that she is a coquette, for she is always flirting with the wind. And certainly whenever the wind blew, the reed made the most graceful curtsies. I admit that she is domestic, he continued, but I love traveling, and my wife, consequently, should love traveling also. Will you come away with me? He said finally to her, but the reed shook her head. She was so attached to her home. You have been trifling with me, he cried. I am off to the pyramids. Goodbye. And he flew away. That's a hell of a breakup. All day long he flew, and at night time he arrived at the city. Where shall I put up? He said. I hope the town has made preparations. Then he saw the statue on the tall column. I will put up there, he cried. It is a fine position, with plenty of fresh air. So he alighted just between the feet of the happy prince. I have a golden bedroom, he said softly to himself as he looked around, and he prepared to go to sleep. But just as he was putting his head under his wing, a large drop of water fell on him. What a curious thing, he cried. There is not a single cloud in the sky. The stars are quite clear and bright, and yet it is raining. The climate in the north of Europe is really dreadful. The reed used to like the rain, but that was merely her selfishness. Then another drop fell. What is the use of a statue if it cannot keep the rain off? He said. I must look for a good chimney pot, and he determined to fly away. But before he had opened his wings, a third drop fell, and he looked up and saw, what did he see? The eyes of the happy prince were filled with tears, and tears were running down his golden cheeks. His face was so beautiful in the moonlight that the little swallow was filled with pity. Who are you? He said. I am the happy prince. Why are you weeping then? Asked the swallow. You have quite drenched me. And there's a very pretty picture as well. I'll give you a moment to absorb it. It's the park, I imagine, that the swallow came from. Oh, it's the palace. The palace is coming. When I was alive, and I had a human heart, answered the statue, I did not know what tears were, for I lived in the palace of Sans-Souci, where sorrow is not allowed to enter. In the daytime I played with my companions in the garden, and in the evening I led the dance in the great hall. Round the garden ran a very lofty wall, but I never cared to ask what lay beyond it. Everything about me was so beautiful. My courtiers called me the happy prince, and happy indeed I was, if pleasure be happiness. So I lived, and so I died. And now that I am dead, they have set me up here so high that I can see all the ugliness and all the misery of my city. And though my heart is made of lead, yet I cannot choose but weep. What? Is he not solid gold? said the swallow to himself. He was too polite to make any personal remarks out loud. Far away, continued the statue in a low musical voice, far away in a little street, there is a poor house. One of the windows is open, and though through it I can see a woman seated at a table. Her face is thin and worn, and she has coarse red hands all pricked by a needle, for she is a seamstress. She is embroidering passion flowers on a satin gown for the loveliest of the Queen's maids of honors to wear at the next court ball. In a bed in the corner of the room, her little boy is lying ill. He has a fever and is asking for oranges. His mother has nothing to give him but river water, so he is crying. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, will you not bring her the ruby out of my sword hilt? My feet are fastened to this pedestal, and I cannot move. I am waited for in Egypt, said the swallow. My friends are flying up and down the Nile, and talking to the large lotus flowers. Soon they will go to sleep in the tomb of the great king. The king is there himself in his painted coffin. He is wrapped in yellow linen and embalmed with spices. Round his neck is a chain of pale green jade, and his hands are like withered leaves. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, said the prince, will you not stay with me for one night and be my messenger? The boy is so thirsty, and the mother so sad. I don't think I like boys, answered the swallow. Last summer, when I was staying on the river, there were 2 rude boys, the miller's son, who were always throwing stones at me. They never hit me, of course. We swallows fly far too well for that. And besides, I come of a family famous for its agility, but still it was a mark of disrespect. But the happy prince looked so sad that the little swallow was sorry. It is very cold here, he said, but I will stay with you for one night and be your messenger. Thank you, little swallow, said the prince. So the swallow picked out the great ruby from the prince's sword and flew away with it in his beaks over the roofs of the town. He passed by the great cathedral tower where the white marble angels were sculptured. He passed by the palace and heard the sound of dancing. A beautiful girl came out on the balcony with her lover. How wonderful the stars are, he said to her, and how wonderful is the power of love. I hope my dress will be ready in time for the state ball, she answered. I have ordered passion flowers to be embroidered on it, but the seamstresses are so lazy. He passed over the river and saw the lanterns hanging to the masts of the ships. He passed over the ghetto and saw the old Jews bargaining with each other and weighing out money in copper scales. At last he came to the poorhouse and looked in. The boy was tossing feverishly on his bed, and the mother had fallen asleep. She was so tired. In he hopped and laid the great ruby on the table beside the woman's thimble. Then he flew gently round the bed, fanning the boy's forehead with his wings. How cool I feel, said the boy. I must be getting better. And he sank into a delicious slumber. Then the swallow flew back to the happy prince and told him what he had done. It is curious, he remarked, but I feel quite warm now, although it is so cold. That is because you have done a good action, said the prince, and the little swallow began to think, and then he fell asleep. Thinking always made him sleepy. I mean, really, who doesn't get sleepy when they think? When day broke, he flew down the river and had a bath. What a remarkable phenomenon, said the professor of ornithology as he was passing over the bridge. A swallow in winter. And he wrote a long letter about it to the local newspaper. Everyone quoted it. It was full of so many words that they could not understand. Tonight, I go to Egypt, said the swallow. He was in high spirits at the prospect. He visited all the public monuments and sat a long time on the top of the church steeple. Wherever he went, the sparrows chirruped and said to each other, "What a distinguished stranger!" So he enjoyed himself very much. But when the moon rose, he flew back to the happy prince. "Have you any commissions for Egypt?" he cried. "I am just starting." "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince. "Will you not stay with me one night longer?" And there's a picture of the gown that the seamstress was working on. It's another beautiful piece of art. I am waited for in Egypt, answered the swallow. Tomorrow my friends will fly up to the second cataract. The river horse couches there among the bulrushes, and on a great granite throne sits the god Memnon. All night long he watches the stars, and when the morning star shines, he utters one cry of joy, and then he is silent. At noon, the yellow lions come down to the water's edge to drink. They have eyes like green beryls, and their roar is louder than the roar of the cataract. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, said the prince, far away across the city. I see a young man in a garret. He is leaning over a desk covered with papers, and in a tumbler by his side there is a bunch of withered violets. His hair is brown and crisp. His lips are red as pomegranate. He has large and dreamy eyes. He is trying to finish a play for the director of the theater, but he is too cold to write anymore. There is no fire in the grate, and hunger has made him faint. I will wait with you one night longer, said the swallow, who really had a good heart. Shall I take him another ruby? Alas, I have no ruby now, said the prince. My eyes are all that I have left. They are made of rare sapphires, which were brought out of India 1,000 years ago. Pluck out one of them and take it to him. He will sell it to the jeweler and buy food and firewood and finish his play. Dear prince, said the swallow, I cannot do that, and he began to weep. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, said the prince, do as I command you. So the swallow plucked out one of the prince's eyes and flew away to the student's garret. It was easy enough to get in, so there was a hole in the roof, as there was a hole in the roof. Through this he darted and came into the room. The young man had his head buried in his hands, so he did not hear the flutter of the bird's wings. And when he looked, he found the beautiful sapphire lying on the withered violets. I am beginning to be appreciated, he cried. This is from some great admirer. Now I can finish my play. Then he looked quite happy. The next day the swallow flew down to the harbor. He sat on the mast of a large vessel and watched the sailors hauling big chests out of the hold with ropes. Heave ahoy! They shouted as each chest came up. I am going to Egypt, cried the swallow, but nobody minded. And when the moon rose, he flew back to the happy prince. I am come to bid you goodbye, he cried. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, said the prince, will you not stay with me one night longer? It is winter, answered the swallow, and the chill snow will soon be here. In Egypt the sun is warm on the green palm trees, and the crocodiles lie in the mud and look lazily about them. My companions are building a nest in the temple of the Baalbec, and pink and white doves are watching them and cooing to each other. Dear prince, I must leave you, but I will never forget you. Next spring I will bring you back 2 beautiful jewels in place of those you have given away. The ruby shall be redder than a red rose, and the sapphire shall be as blue as the great sea. In the square below, said the happy prince, there stands a little match girl. She has let her matches fall in the gutter, and they are all spoiled. Her father will beat her if she does not bring out home some money, and she is crying. She has no shoes or stockings, and her little head is bare. Pluck out my other eye and give it to her, and her father will not beat her." "I will stay with you one night longer," said the swallow, "but I cannot pluck out your eye. You would be quite blind then." "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince, "do as I command you." So he plucked out the prince's other eye and darted down with it. He swooped past the match girl and slipped the jewel into the palm of her hand. "What a lovely bit of glass," she cried, the little girl, and she ran home laughing. Then the swallow came back to the prince. "You are blind now," he said, "so I will stay with you always." "No, little swallow," said the poor prince, "you must go away to Egypt." "I will stay with you always," said the swallow, and he slept at the prince's feet. All the next day he sat on the prince's shoulder and told him stories of what he'd seen in strange lands. He told him of the red ibises who stand in long rows on the banks of the Nile and catch goldfish in their beaks, of the Sphinx who is as old as the world itself and lives in the desert and knows everything, of the merchants who walk slowly by the side of their camels and carry amber beads in their hands, of the king of the mountains, of the moon, who is as black as ebony and worships a large crystal, of the great green snake that sleeps in a palm tree and has 20 priests to feed it with honey cakes, and of the pygmies who sail over a big lake on large flat leaves and are always at war with the butterflies. "Dear little swallow," said the prince, "you tell me of marvelous things, but more marvelous than anything is the suffering of men and of women. There is no mystery so great as misery. Fly over my city, little swallow, and tell me what you see there." And this incredibly pretty picture, which I think is the best one of the bunch, is a picture of the seamstress sitting outside the castle where they dance and carouse, and she is making their dresses. So the swallow flew over the great city and saw the rich making merry in their beautiful houses while the beggars were sitting at the gates. He flew into the dark lanes and saw the white faces of starving children looking out listlessly at the black streets. Under the archway of a bridge, 2 little boys were lying in one another's arms to try and keep themselves warm. "How hungry we are," they said. "You must not lie here," shouted the watchman, and they wandered out into the rain. Then he flew back and told the prince what he had seen. "I am covered with fine gold," said the prince. "You must take it off, leaf by leaf, and give it to my poor. The living always think that gold can make them happy." Leaf after leaf of the fine gold the swallow picked off till the happy prince looked quite dull and grey. Leaf after leaf of the fine gold he brought to the poor, and the children's faces grew rosier, and they laughed and played games in the street. "We have bread now," they cried. Then the snow came, and after the snow came the frost. The streets looked as if they were made of silver, they were so bright and glistening. Long icicles like crystal daggers hung down from the eaves of the houses. Everybody went about in furs, and the little boys wore scarlet caps and skated on the ice. The poor little swallow grew colder and colder, but he would not leave the prince. He loved him too well. He picked up crumbs outside the baker's door, and when the baker was not looking, he tried to keep himself warm by flapping his wings. But at last he knew he was going to die. He had just strength to fly up to the prince's shoulder once more. "Goodbye, dear prince," he murmured. "Will you let me kiss your hand?" "I am glad that you are going to Egypt at last, little swallow," said the prince. "You have stayed too long here, but but you must kiss me on the lips, for I love you." "It is not Egypt that I am going," said the swallow. "I am going to the house of death. Death is the brother of sleep, is he not?" And he kissed the happy prince on the lips and fell down dead at his feet. At that moment a curious crack sounded inside the statue, as if something had broken. The fact is that the leaden heart had snapped right in two. It certainly was a dreadfully hard frost. Early the next morning, the mayor, who was walking in the square below in company with the town councillors, as they passed the column, he looked up at the statue. "Dear me, how shabby the happy prince looks," he said. "Very shabby indeed," cried the town's councillors, who always agreed with the mayor when they looked up to it. "A ruby has fallen out of his sword, his eyes are gone, and he is golden no longer," said the mayor. "In fact, he is little better than a beggar." "Little better than a beggar," said the town councillors. "And here is actually a dead bird at his feet," continued the mayor. "We must really issue a proclamation that birds are not allowed to die here." And the town clerk made a note of the protestation. Pardon me. Then they pulled down the statue of the happy prince. As he is no longer beautiful, he is no longer... Sorry, it's cutting off my text. It's the worst time to do it, too. Pardon me. As he is no longer beautiful, he is no longer useful, said the art professor at the university. They melted the statue in a furnace, and the mayor held a meeting of the corporation to decide what was to be done with the metal. "We must have another statue, of course," he said, "and it shall be a statue of myself." "Of myself," said each of the town councillors, and they quarreled. When I last heard of them, they were quarreling still. "What a strange thing," said the overseer of the workmen at the foundry. "This broken lead heart will not melt in the furnace. We must throw it away." So they threw it on a dust heap, where the dead swallow was also lying. "Bring me the two most precious things in the city," said God to one of his angels, and the angel brought him the leaden heart and the dead bird. "You have rightly chosen," said God, "for in my garden of paradise this little bird shall sing forevermore, and in my city of gold the happy prince shall praise me." And that's the end of that story. The ending, once again, classic fairy tale format, extremely abrupt. Just all of a sudden, here we are with God and angels. And I think it's just, I don't know, it's exactly that kind of quality that I really like about stories like this. It's like they have nothing to... Oh, Kotara says, "I know this tale so well and I am still crying." Kotaru was who requested it. So if there is one you want me to read, it's not a guarantee because I'll, screen content. But let me know. But yeah, obviously a very sad tale. Truthfully, both of them were not particularly happy, which is another theme you see in fairy tales. I know that sort of Disney has created an impression that fairy tales are happily ever afters. There are some fairy tales like that, though I gotta be honest, if you actually think about the implications of what happened in the story, the happily ever after is not a comfort. It doesn't sound reasonable. All right. Well, I really appreciate the people who have stuck it out with me. If you're just coming in now and you missed it, that's okay. You didn't miss anything. It's mostly just me reading. So the recording will be up on our stream. And if you haven't noticed, in the comments, or not the comments, but the box underneath the video, the info, I will always put a little clickable time as to when certain things start. So if you want to skip the preamble where I talked about birthday gifts, or you want to skip the waiting room section, there'll be little times. You just click on them and you start wherever in the video you see fit. Katara says this is happy, and then it says your soul is more important than your mortal life. I mean, yes, but also, who isn't sad about the poor little sparrow? Yeah, that's true. Kataru has also said, and that good deeds do not necessarily find reward in any other way than the satisfaction you feel upon doing them, which I think is actually the summary that I would give that story as well. And it's probably the aspect I like the most. I think even if you are not religious, that message permeates just as clear, which is the warmth the swallow feels in a cold world is from doing kindness for others. So I will say we are going to have a Thursday stream, which is going to be nothing like this. It's going to be like the first one you saw if you watched the one last week, where we are going to write stories together live. Now for that one, it's going to be Dana again. It's going to be myself again. However, it looks like we're going to get Felix. And I say looks like, he's on board, but he's in Hong Kong. So we'll have to see how the internet holds up. But we will be writing stories together, and I really hope it works, because Felix is one of the funniest writers I've ever read, and an absolutely delightfully oddball person at times, so who is almost certainly going to say something that will catch you off guard in a good way. He's not like rude or shocking or anything. He just has very peculiar and quirky views on things like movies and whatnot. So that is 2 days away, and I will put some of those notifications out tomorrow and the day after. Tune in if you are following us on Instagram or on Twitter, which again is down in the info box, but it's Varietal, VARIETAL _lit, LIT. If you put that into either Twitter or, I don't know why I said Twitter so weird. I'm still in story reader mode. Twitter or the Instagram. Then you can follow us there and you will get notifications. There is some excitement for Felix to be there in the chat. But as far as our time here tonight, those are the stories I wanted to tell. I really appreciate you giving me some of your time. And again, if you want to read any of these stories, they're up on Project Gutenberg in digital formats. They're all public domain. They're all free. And I really appreciate you guys showing up. And I hope to see you on Thursday night for a much more energetic and silly stream. And if you like this stream, please let me know. Or if you know something that would improve it or whatever else, please let me know. Because I really do like reading these stories. And I know that this will be the less popular stream. So if you like it, let people know about it. I guess the thing I can say is if you like my voice, that's the selling point here. And you think that I do a good job of telling these tales, tell people about it. And yeah, I hope I made a stream that at the very least is comfortable to fall asleep to. I mean that seriously, that's not a joke. Thank you so much, guys. And I really appreciate you guys showing up. Bye.